Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is such a delight for me to be hosting Susan McPherson today on Take the Leap podcast. Take the Leap podcast brings to you extraordinary women who have such stories that can be inspiring for us, especially I think on a gray day like we have here in Switzerland. It is really amazing for us to be listening to these stories. I like to go behind the scenes to bring, what were the real tribulations of their journeys. Susan is a serial connector and angel investor. She's also a corporate responsibility expert. Susan is the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies, which is a communication consultancy focused on the intersection of brands and social impact, something which is of great interest to me. Susan has recently published her book, The Lost Art of Connecting, and serves on the board of the 19 News. A very warm welcome to you, Susan. How are you today?
I am well, given the state of the world. So, trying to keep my spirits up and supporting people all over the place.
Yes, yes. I think that we're going through some really trying times, and yeah, I mean, I got so sucked into this whole thing the last couple of days. Today, I've said I'm just going to focus on my task for today. But
Well, we can do, right?
yeah, I guess we all do. And you said you're calling in from LA today, so it's really
No, I'm leaving for LA. I'm in New York right now, but flying to LA is very close to almost flying to London in terms of
right. Oh,
distance.
yes, I can imagine. I can imagine. Susan, tell us a little bit about your trajectory, right? Your professional trajectory.
Sure.
And of course, I mean, the focus of our conversation today is what triggered you to take, this big leap which you have taken, and what was at stake for you?
Oh, good Lord. Well, at this point in my life, I have had 9 lives. So I'm just trying to wonder which life to jump into. But I would have to think 10 years ago at the age of 48 when I launched my company. And I wish I could tell your audience that I had this grand master plan, but I was what you call an accidental entrepreneur. I was at a company creating a corporate responsibility practice within a consulting firm.
Right.
And I noticed that many of the top talent were exiting. And when you work at a consulting firm and there is, people running to the door, oh my goodness, I need to find a new job. And so I sent out an email to maybe 200 of my closest friends confidentially and said, can you keep your ears out? I need to find a new job. And a couple organizations said, if you leave, we'll hire you as a consultant for a couple of months to kind of get you through tide you over. And so I left on a Friday and I started on a Monday because I thought those two organizations were going to change their mind. And that is how my company was born. But the question is, how did I end up pursuing a career in social impact and social good and helping business be a force for good? Goes back to 2005, 2004. I had moved to New York City knowing no one. And I had a habit whenever I moved to a new city, what I would do is join a nonprofit, get involved, volunteer, so that I would not only gain skills that I wasn't gaining at my day job, but I would also meet people, make friends, learn about people who were different than myself. And in 2004, I joined an organization called the Business Council for Peace, which also goes by Be Peace. And it was founded right after 9/11. And the goal was, how do we help women entrepreneurs in regions of conflict around the world create jobs? Because we knew in many regions of conflict, women can't do anything, right? They're tied to their homes. And many of them, and we felt that the more and more jobs that were created in places like Afghanistan, Rwanda, El Salvador, Guatemala, all places that had, and certainly Afghanistan had imploded just a few years before, but all had suffered from, violence. And what we did was, over a 3-year period, put women that we identified as fast runners with propensities to succeed, and provided mentoring, training, marketing help, all through Skype at the time, because there wasn't really social media. And when we could, we visited in them. So in 2005, I went to Kabul in Afghanistan for 2 weeks, and I spent a good deal of time with Afghan entrepreneurs, with other women in the Be Peace Network. And it was the first time I saw business being a force for good in the world. And I thought to myself, we need more of this. Yes, it's important for corporate donations and corporate philanthropy, but there's so much knowledge power and brains in people everywhere. And of course, this network was primarily women, but it just really, really showed me and propelled me, dare I say, into a commitment going forward. And that was almost 20 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since.
What an amazing story, Susan. And,
Thank
find something that really resonates deeply with your heart, and not just, because of course, all of us know we want to pay our bills, we want a job, all of that is a given. But then to find work that so resonates with your heart, and if you can then combine that with something that you do to make a living, I always say this: if you can combine making a living and making a life, I mean, nothing nothing better
Yes,
than that,
thank
right?
you for that. Exactly.
That's phenomenal. Coming back to your leap of 10 years back, when you became this
Yeah.
accidental entrepreneur, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? I think in the beginning you probably mitigated with this. You said you could start off with a couple of your existing, friends slash clients
Mhm,
or
mhm.
network. But I'm guessing this is not going to be enough to like carry you through the whole process.
No, no. And in fact, for the first year, it was literally a placeholder till I found my next job. I mean, I always joke I named it McPherson Strategies because it wasn't really going to be anything. And that's my ex-husband's name. And we broke up 10 years prior in 2003. So he's a good guy. I'll grant him that. So, but not, what I wanted to hang my, shingle on for the rest of my life. Right. But I think some of the challenges were I had no idea what I was doing. I had never, unlike so many, I hadn't had a burning desire to be an entrepreneur. I hadn't taken a business class since 1983 in college, like freshman economics. Spreadsheets scared what out of me. So those were the things that, and then what I learned through mentors and counselors and such is all of that can be fixed, right? And I started to rely on what I was good at and getting out and meeting people and talking about the industry and connecting people. And of course, because of all the connections I had built in my 20s, in my 30s, and a good part of my 40s, I could go back to them and not ask for help, but ask for referrals, which I guess is help. But still, it was, for me, the hardest part was getting over the fear of failure, which I'm sure is, significantly common in founders. But then also rely on the fact that, I had worked for 30 years. I knew what to do.
Yes. You knew you had the technical skill set for that job for sure. And so business development often is a big challenge, right, for a lot of founders.
Yeah.
Like you said, you had developed those networks, and I loved what you said in terms of going to a new city and always getting involved in some sort of a voluntary organization. I think that is something I would definitely encourage. I mean, running a voluntary organization myself, I must say that I've had this habit also in, before starting off an organization like this. And then I see these women, joining in for many, many different reasons, actually, to be volunteers. In our case, mentors and mentees are plenty, right? But then when we go to that inner circle of, 3 or 4 women managing a whole city, managing 40, 50 women through like almost a year, that is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And these cohort leaders or regional leaders who are in the core team with me, they really do it, because of the cause, right? That's something that resonates with them. And I think we sometimes underestimate how much we can learn by being a part of a voluntary organization. Because
Yeah.
what I very quickly learned was that you have no leverage like a performance bonus, let alone
No.
and so everything that you're using to influence is really what is it that you're saying and who is it that you're being, so it's really gets to that very, very quickly. But that is a great idea to think about developing a network when you don't need it. I think
Yeah.
that is something that probably you have done, and I know I have done inadvertently. I don't think somebody told me that you must do that,
No,
It
no.
happened very inadvertently. And that's the reason now there are all these, Thrive is now present in more than 10 countries because of just knowing people in
Yeah.
many different places with many different walks of life, right? But going back then, when you look back at now, you are leading a successful organization for a while. What do you think were the skills and maybe even more importantly, the mindset that supported you to keep growing and that has supported your, and maybe coming back to this whole idea of your book, because I'm very interested. You call the book The Lost Art of Connecting, so you have been connecting and you have written this book. So tell us a little bit about that journey, Susan.
The book or the,
Well, you have been connecting and your book is called
yeah,
The Lost Art of
yeah,
Connecting. So I
yeah.
thought maybe there is a link.
Well, of course, and I credit again, and I don't want to be repetitive, but I really credit the incredible communities I built over the years. And when people reached out and said, and please don't say this to other people, but can I pick your brain? I said yes. And I'm not, I know people are busy and we're asked a lot of times for help, and oftentimes we can't, but try every once in a while to answer that call, because I fervently believe I would be nowhere in life without the people who paved ways, who opened doors. And I really I felt that over the last 10 years. But I think some of the lessons learned of running the company is one, letting go and being okay with other people managing things. And I learned early on, when you suck at something, it's okay. Have other people, bring on other people. And a very wise consultant told me, um, about a year in, and she said, Susan, I had bet you have a tendency to hoard. And I said, hoard. She said, not spend during the good times because you're saving income coming in from clients for a rainy day in the future, meaning, when the business goes dry, and you want to make sure there's a cushion. And I laughed because that's exactly what I was doing. And I was trying to do it all. And her point was, bring on people now so that you can continue doing what you're good at and have other people help doing the things that either one, you don't like to do, or two, are lesser skills for you. So that was really, really important advice that I would give to anyone and everyone who's starting, whether it's a 2-person shop, or if you have aspirations to grow much, much larger. But you also have to learn to ask for help. My book has a methodology called Gather, Ask, Do, and the ask portion in the kind of overarching methodology is learning to ask meaningful questions of others so you can learn what's important to them.
Mm,
But I also have a chapter called the 5-minute ask, and that is where you keep people up to date with what's happening in your life so that when you do need something,
mm,
you can make an ask. And I really think the 25 years of my life professionally was very much the 5-minute ask. I kept people up to date. I shared, I made sure I, showcased their wins and just kept them on the journey. So, I'm not suggesting you have to like send out an update every week about what's up with you, but if you want people to have interest in what you're doing, you need to share with them, and not, in a braggadocious way, but in a,
social
yeah,
media days, Susan, because I mean, today it's much easier, right? You put out a post on, you have a book, you're speaking at a conference, you just put out a post and people are aware of what is it that you are doing. But pre
exactly.
social media days, how did you do that? Did you like send handwritten letters?
Over the years, did I send hundreds?
Like pre social media days, right? Like, how were you keeping in
Well, let
touch?
me give you kind of the world I grew up in.
Yeah.
When I was a child in the late 60s and throughout the 70s, every morning at the breakfast table, my parents would have the 5 local newspapers splayed out on the table.
Yeah.
I would have one teeny little space for my bowl of cereal. They might have yesterday's or the day before's New York Times, because we lived in upstate New York, and it came via the mail. Very different world. And they would both have their scissors or razor blades and cutting and clipping articles that made them think of people they knew. And then they would go to their respective manual typewriters. There were 2 in the house, and each would type little missives and pop them in envelopes, and off they would go in the mail.
Wow.
And I thought everybody's parents did that. Okay. So, years and years later in the late 80s, when I got my first fax machine, I was like, I can do what they were doing, but simultaneously. But for anybody who's listening, you may know that fax machines didn't really work well. But then fast forward to 1995, 96, when the internet happened, I could find an article and share it amongst 15 people with something saying, oh, this made me think of all of you. I'd love you to meet. So as technology progressed, I took what they used to do, but adapted it for this new world. And of course, with social media, I created on Twitter something in 2010, which I laugh at the name now, called CSR Chat, which stood for Corporate Responsibility Chat. And every 2 weeks, we would bring on a guest and do a Twitter chat. And the community grew and grew and grew. It went on for 6 years. And the goal of that was to literally shine a light on people in the space, bring people together. And honestly, I think that had a lot to do with the growth of my company. And, we all know visibility begets visibility, but this kind of visibility was building community. It wasn't like, look at me. It was like, look at whoever I was showcasing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, that's really the ABC of brand building, I guess, and
Yeah, but not,
building a
yeah.
brand with the community. I think that has a huge strength. I mean, I can only quote when we started this. I don't know if I shared with you, Susan. We launched this first book of Thrive. It's called Unstoppable in June this year. And that has
Amazing.
around 20 mentoring stories.
Wow.
As an author, you probably know how challenging it is to get a book out. But when you have the
Oh my
story
God,
of,
yes.
20 members from your community that is in the book, then the book spreads in a completely different ways that you can never imagine. I think there were orders coming from so many countries. I can tell you it was really challenging to ship to those countries because we learned it the hard way that, there are customs involved. And, especially if you want to ship a hard copy book,
Yeah.
versus just going Kindle or Amazon print on demand. That's easier. But we learned it the hard way, and we have learned it now. But if we come up with another book, we'll do it a bit differently. But the whole idea of getting all of these women, getting the community, getting their voices heard, I mean, it's just phenomenal, right? And it has this amazing what Adam Grant calls this give and take effect, right? Because I think it can become very quickly, marketing or branding can become so much about taking rather than giving. Whereas if you are building a community simultaneously and adding value to the community, I think there is a beautiful amalgamation of give and take. And I think that you are almost the epitome of doing it.
Well,
Like you
I interviewed Adam for the book, and Adam was on CSR Chat way back when Give and Take popped. And one of the things in Give and Take that really resonated with me was take the meeting, and the more meetings you take, the more efficient you are with your time.
Mm. Well, you took the meeting with me too.
Exactly. See?
Yes. What advice would you give, Susan, for somebody, who's hesitating to take the leap, right? Especially coming back to the launch of your organization. And you said, of course, it was accidental. But today we live in a different world. I think not too many people will have only an accidental, leap.
No, a lot of people have the burning desire to be.
Yes,
But
burning desire, wishing. However, still an extreme amount of fear of letting go of what they perceive as not a life but a lifestyle. So a couple of years back, I think just before COVID, with Thrive and another organization, we launched a program called Empower Her. And that's my experience of all of these founders, coming together. They really wanted to do something, and actually half of them were in jobs, right? Half of them were much more actively pursuing their passions. But especially for those who were in jobs, there was a huge fear because, of course, I mean, it is well-known statistics that I don't even remember that, but so many businesses fail, right? Like a huge percentage of the businesses fail once they are launched in the first 3 to 5 years. And I think that fear sort of kept them back. They did not even actually try out and see if this is going to work for them. So, what advice would you give those people who are sort of sitting on the fence? They want to do it, but they're very fearful that they might fail.
Well, look, I am a fervent believer in if you don't try, guess what? Nothing's ever going to happen. And I feel like we have to take risks. Now, I understand a lot of people don't have the privilege to take risks, so I want to say that. But I would caution people to build a community first. Even if you have this burning desire, and even if you have the funding to do it, take a step back and just think about it. Because honestly, everything takes a village. No matter how successful you are, I don't believe anybody can do anything on their own, especially in this very complicated world we live in. So take a step back, maybe for a couple of months, and really kind of get a sense of who is in your community, and if who do you need to get in your community if you haven't already, right? So I think just that. I'm saying I may sound like I'm conflicted here because I'm saying take risks, but I'm also saying take a step back. But I do think the both can be done, very, very quickly. But I do think we have to take the time to build connections or reconnect with people before. Because if I didn't have those 300 people to email and say help, I'm looking to leave, those opportunities might not have come my way. And there is a bit of fearlessness in being vulnerable and putting yourself out there like that, both for founding something, of course, because of the failure factor, but also saying I may need help.
Yeah, how does one overcome, Susan, this whole idea of I may need help, right? Or I need help. Especially, I'm surrounded by women also in this community who are very strong, who are self starters, who are very hardworking, and who have been relatively or very successful. So once you are, you bring all of those factors together and you want to now start something else where you may need help, where you may not be the expert, where you may not have the connections, everything that worked probably in a job setting and made them successful then starts becoming something that pulls them back, right? Because they're so used to like getting work done, they're used to having teams and resources when they work for organizations. This whole idea of asking for help itself becomes something that is difficult. What is the mindset, tip that you might give them to be able to ask for help?
I think the most important thing is when you ask for help, offer something. Okay. This, I joke, but when I give talks, I often ask for a show of hands from the audience. How many times have people reached out to you on LinkedIn and said, will you connect with me? You say yes. And then within an hour, they're selling you something or asking you for funding or asking you for an introduction to somebody. And of course, all hands raise. And I say, well, what about if somebody reached out and said, Shivangi, I understand you have a podcast and I happen to know a sponsor who might be interested. And oh, by the way, can you have 10 minutes for me because I'm getting ready to launch my own podcast? I'm just making this up.
Yeah, yeah, sure,
Super
sure.
silly. How much more would that matter? Like how and I realize many people, certainly at the early stages of starting a company or in the early stages of their career, may feel like, what do I have to offer? We all have something to offer. And the beautiful thing is we live in a world where you can learn so much about someone before you reach out. Whether it's looking at their, what they're upset about on Twitter, or looking and seeing if they have children or dogs on Instagram, or looking, at their career trajectory, or seeing if you have connections in common. But I think do that 10 minutes of research before you reach out to ask for help, and offer something, or send them an article, or send them your favorite, give them something to give them a sense that they're not just a line on a spreadsheet that you're knocking off. So that would be my advice when you ask me that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. That's really useful. Something from the last art of connecting that you would like to leave for our audience as a last thing. I loved what you said around the 5-minute ask. Is there something else from your book that you really feel should be out there, that message should be out there?
Well, I have so many, but I would leave you with just a couple. Listen more than we speak, and lead with how we can be helpful to others. It's a beautiful way to show up in the world. And I do understand there are going to be times where you can't be helpful, right? You have a sick child, you have a sick parent, you're dealing with financial challenges. I get it. But this is over a lifetime. And if more of us walked into rooms, virtual, in person, with that way of being, I think the world might be a little bit of a better place.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what we need to all hear this again and again. Thank you so much for your time, Susan. It has been lovely to speak with you and wish you safe travels. And of course, we'll stay connected. Take care. Bye for today.
Thank you, Shivani.
Bye, Susan.